There is a story in 1 Kings chapter 10 that ends in mid-sentence. A queen travels 1,000 miles to test the wisdom of a king. She arrives in Jerusalem with a great caravan, with camels carrying spices and gold and precious stones. She asks him hard questions. He answers every one of them. She blesses his God. They exchange gifts. And then, verse 13. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. That is how the story ends in your Bible. 2 sentences. She came. She went. The longest journey to Israel by any monarch in the entire Old Testament, and the text closes the chapter and moves on. Most Christians who have ever read this passage have asked the same question. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why did she travel that far to test one man? And after she gave Solomon gifts of gold and precious stones, after she stood in his court for what the text implies was many weeks, what exactly did she take home with her? Your Bible never tells you, but the Ethiopian tradition has been telling you for 3,000 years exactly what she took home, and it was not just spices and gold. Today, we open the story 1 Kings tells in 8 verses, and the Ethiopian Bible has been telling in full for 2.5 millennia. Start with what your Bible actually tells you. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 1. And when the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. Notice what the Hebrew text emphasizes. She came because of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord. She did not come to negotiate trade. She did not come to discuss politics. She came because she had heard about a God, a specific God, the God of Israel, and she wanted to test the man whose reputation was tied to that God's name. The text describes her arrival in extraordinary detail for a Hebrew narrative. Verse 2. She came to Jerusalem with a very great train, with camels that bear spices, and very much gold, and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. She came with the largest royal caravan recorded in the Old Testament. She came with a question that had to be asked face to face. And when she arrived, she spoke with Solomon about all that was in her heart. Read that phrase again. All, that was, in her heart. This was not a state visit. This was a personal pilgrimage. Solomon answered her every question. Verse 3. There was not anything hid from the king, which he told her not. She tested. He answered. The text gives no specifics, no record of what the questions were, no record of what the answers were. We are simply told that the wisest king in Israel's history withheld nothing from the queen who had crossed 1,000 miles to ask. And then comes verse 5. And when the queen of Sheba had seen all Solomon's wisdom, and the house that he had built, and the meat of his table, and the sitting of his servants, and the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and his ascent by which he went up unto the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. There was no more spirit in her. The Hebrew is striking. She was overwhelmed. She was undone. And then she said the words that have been quoted in Ethiopian liturgy for 2,000 years. Verse 9. Blessed be the Lord thy God, which delighted in thee, to set thee on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, therefore made he thee king, to do judgment and justice. She blessed the God of Israel. By name. A foreign queen, in the presence of a foreign king, in a foreign court, naming the God of a people not her own. This is the moment your Bible records. This is also the moment the Bible stops telling you the story. Verses 10 through 13 describe the exchange of gifts. She gave Solomon 120 talents of gold, by modern weight, roughly 9,000 pounds. She gave him spices in quantities the text says no one before or after equaled. She gave him precious stones. Solomon gave her, the text says, all her desire, whatsoever she asked, beside that which Solomon gave her of his royal bounty. And then, verse 13. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. The chapter moves on. The next verse begins with Solomon's annual revenue. The queen is gone. The story is over. But not in Ethiopia. Not in the book the Ethiopian Orthodox Church considers one of its most sacred national treasures. Not in the Kebra Nagast. The Kebra Nagast, in English, The Glory of Kings, is the national epic of Ethiopia. It was compiled in its final written form in the 14th century, drawing on much older traditions, some oral, some textual, going back at least to the early Christian centuries. It tells the story of Ethiopian royal lineage, the founding of the Solomonic dynasty, and the relationship between Ethiopia and the God of Israel. And it is, to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, sacred history. According to the Kebra Nagast, the queen who came to Solomon had a name. Her name was Makeda. She ruled a kingdom that stretched across what is today northern Ethiopia, Eritrea, and parts of Yemen, a kingdom the ancient world called Saba, and which the Hebrew Bible calls Sheba. She heard of Solomon from a merchant who had traveled to Jerusalem. The merchant returned with descriptions of a king whose wisdom exceeded anything Makeda had encountered. She determined to see him for herself. She prepared the great caravan 1 Kings describes, and she traveled to Jerusalem. She remained in Solomon's court, according to the tradition, for 6 months. She received instruction from him, not just in administrative wisdom, but in the law of Moses, in the worship of the God of Israel, in the deeper questions about creation and providence that had been on her heart when she set out. And the Kebra Nagast tells us that during her stay, on the eve of her departure, something happened that the Bible does not record. Solomon hosted a great feast in her honor. She told him she would leave the next morning, and he asked her, in exchange for everything he had given her, for one promise, that she would not take anything that belonged to him without his permission. She agreed. The feast was salted heavily. She drank wine. She slept in the chamber Solomon prepared. And in the night she rose, thirsty, and took water from a vessel Solomon had placed near her bed. He had been waiting. He confronted her. She had broken her promise, and so, by the terms of the agreement, she became his. In the morning she departed, carrying within her, the Kebra Nagast tells us, a child, the son of Solomon, king of Israel, and Makeda, queen of Sheba. She returned to her kingdom. She gave birth. She named the boy Menelik. In time, he would come to be called by another name, Menelik, the first. Menelik was raised in his mother's kingdom. He learned the wisdom she had brought back from Jerusalem. He learned the law of the God of Israel. And when he was old enough to travel, he made the same journey his mother had made, in reverse. He went to find his father. According to the Kebra Nagast, Solomon recognized his son immediately. The resemblance was unmistakable. He kept Menelik in Jerusalem for an extended time. He instructed him personally. He prepared him to take his place as the founder of a royal lineage. And when Menelik prepared to return to Ethiopia, Solomon anointed him as a king. Solomon also gave him a company of attendants. According to the tradition, every elder of Israel was required to send a son with Menelik back to Ethiopia, to serve in the new royal court, to instruct in the law, to establish the worship of the God of Israel in the kingdom that was about to be founded. Among those sent was Azariah, the son of the high priest, the most significant Levite to leave Jerusalem in a single generation. And what happened on the journey home is the part of the Kebra Nagast that we will return to next time, because Menelik did not return to Ethiopia with only attendants and gifts. He returned, the tradition says, with the most sacred object in the entire Hebrew religion, carried out of Jerusalem with the consent of heaven, if not of Solomon, and brought to the kingdom of his mother, where it has remained, according to Ethiopia, ever since. We will hold that story for next week, because what concerns us tonight is the son, the dynasty he founded, the continuity that followed. Menelik I, Menelik Menelik, became, according to the tradition, the founder of the Solomonic dynasty of Ethiopia, the royal house that traced its ancestry in an unbroken male line back through the kings of Ethiopia, through the kings of Aksum, through generations of recorded history, to the son of Solomon and the queen of Sheba. King Ezana of Aksum, the king who in 330 AD became the first monarch in world history to officially adopt Christianity for his kingdom. This same Ezana traced his royal lineage back through the Solomonic line. He understood himself, as every Ethiopian monarch after him understood himself as a successor to the throne of Solomon, as an heir of the covenant that Sheba had carried home with her child. And the dynasty did not end. It continued. Through the centuries of the Aksumite Empire, through the medieval Zagwe interruption, through the restoration of the Solomonic line under Yekuno Amlak in the 13th century, through the long emperors of the early modern period, through Menelik II, who in 1896 defeated the Italian army at the Battle of Adwa, the only African kingdom to successfully resist European colonization in that century, and through the final emperor, Haile Selassie, who reigned until 1974. Haile Selassie, crowned in 1930, deposed by a Marxist coup in 1974. The last emperor in a line that, according to the tradition his country had held continuously for 3,000 years, descended directly from the son of King Solomon. Whether the genealogy is historically literal in every link or theologically literal across centuries, this is the lineage Ethiopia has held, in its constitution, in its imperial coronation rites, in its sacred history. And the framework that holds it together, the framework that tells the story your Bible stops telling after 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 13, has been preserved in one place on earth, in the Kebra Nagast. In Gayad's manuscripts copied by hand, generation after generation, in the monasteries of the Ethiopian highlands, in a tradition that has never stopped telling the story. When the priest at Aksum reads 1 Kings 10 in liturgy, he does not stop at verse 13. He carries the story forward into the Kebra Nagast, the queen who came, the wisdom she received, the son she conceived, the kingdom she founded, the dynasty that ruled her descendants from the 10th century before Christ to the second half of the 20th century after. This is what the channel exists to show you. The story is not lost. The queen is not anonymous. The son is not invented. The dynasty is not legend. Whether you receive the Kebra Nagast as historically literal or as theological history, what it is not is a fringe text. It is the sacred national narrative of one of the oldest Christian nations on earth, a nation whose royal house, until 50 years ago, ruled in the literal name of the covenant Sheba carried home. And once you have heard this, 1 Kings chapter 10 will not read the same. Verse 13, "So she turned and went to her own country," is not the end of the story. It is the moment your Bible turns away. The story continues. The continuation has been preserved, and the people whose history it is have been carrying it for 3,000 years. There is one more thing about what she carried home. One more piece of the story. Because the queen did not return to Ethiopia with only a child in her womb. The Kebra Nagast tells us that her son, when he came of age and went to meet his father in Jerusalem, did not come back empty-handed either. He came back with something that, according to the tradition, has remained in Ethiopia for nearly 3,000 years, guarded continuously, hidden from outside eyes, preserved through invasions, conquests, dynastic upheavals, and modern revolutions. This is Ethiopian Bible revealed. If this opened something up for you, share it with someone who has wondered where her story actually ended. Subscribe. It is genuinely how this channel reaches more people. And next week, we go to the chapel in Aksum, to the building, less than 30 feet square, that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church says houses the Ark of the Covenant, to the single guardian, a monk who is appointed for life and never leaves the compound, who, according to the tradition, sees it every day, to the centuries of pilgrims, scholars, archaeologists, and journalists who have asked to see it, to the answer that has not changed in 1,700 years. The Ark is here. It is guarded. It is not for outside eyes. The tradition is the answer, and the answer has been the same since Menelik first carried it home. Is the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia? Your Bible stops telling you where the Ark went somewhere after the Babylonian exile. The Ethiopian Bible never stopped telling you. And the answer, whether you find it historical or theological, or both, is part of the same continuous narrative the Queen carried home with her son. Until then, keep reading, keep asking. The book is still here.